Hey guys, this is Nick with Cymatics, and welcome to our third bonus video for the Hip Hop Beatmaking Foundations course. And in this video, we're going to be making a lo-fi beat. I'm just going to be covering some of the general concepts. Some are quite different than the other hip hop related videos, but I'll try to get everything across in a concise manner. So without further ado, let's just get started here. First thing I'm going to do is load up Keyscape. Keyscape is a very useful instrument for this genre in particular. So I'm gonna load up electric piano of some kind and do some basic 2-5-1 progression, maybe a Rhodes. So if you want to make a lo-fi beat, just look up what a 2-5-1 progression is, and you can just do that. And then the one, and then the secondary dominant. So we're gonna go into our session view, or arrangement view rather. Do like a tempo of 1, 2, yeah, like 85 BPM. And we're just gonna kind of strum the keys. So not too aggressively, just moving the notes around to make it sound realistic. And then C major 7. This is called a 2-5-1 progression. 2, 5, 1. And then we can extend it here and then play the 4th chord, which is A dominant. It's all about the jazzy kind of voicing. Oops. Obviously you want to mess around with the velocities to make it a bit more realistic sounding. I'm not going to spend too much time on that, so I'm just going to kind of go randomly. And then just loop that. So I'm not going to add the lower bass voice yet into the keys. I'm just going to do that with a separate bass instrument. Maybe you can try a vibe, a univibe sound. Also very prominent in lo-fi music. That's very vintage already. That's nice. It's a nice sound. Oops. And then you can add some embellishments. I want to make this top note a bit quieter and just kind of make the chord a bit more bottom heavy. Like that. That's cool. You can duplicate the loop. Just introducing some variation. Okay. Okay, that's good enough for now. Let's rename that chords. And then we can throw in a bass of some kind. Let's try Omnisphere for the bass. We want to kind of stick to natural instruments, a bass guitar sound, or just a muted bass sound, because there's a lot of cool muted bass Rhodes sounds. Maybe this might even work, to be honest. Yeah, it kind of has an upright sound, and it's not, we don't really care that much that it doesn't sound completely realistic because it'll be covered up in the mix anyway. And then we can add some notes. Okay, I'm just gonna simplify the chords here and just make it come in on the fourth measure. And then obviously this has to be corrected. So the whole thing with the lo-fi music is making everything wonky in terms of the rhythm. Don't quantize everything too much. You'll notice that I'm purposely kind of introducing mistakes. Cool. The sound is completely unserviceable though, so we're gonna have to change that. Maybe we'll have something. Okay, so instead let's load up Keyscape because I know it has some cool bass style patches. Cool. Yeah. Okay, let's cut away a little bit of the high end or low end from this sound. Add a bit of reverb. We can even try the reverb from within Keyscape. Maybe some tremolo. Reduce the time of it. We don't want it to be too much. Maybe try a chorus. Okay, let's keep that looping. And so what we're going to do now is start applying some of the lo-fi effects. But until then, let us first think about some drums. So the whole idea of the drums is making them very wonky and sidechaining everything to the kick. That's a very important concept that I'm going to try and explain to you guys. But for now, let us just have some rim shot as our snare, probably. Try that. Okay, so the main thing is obviously the hi-hats and the kicks. They're both going to give you a very wonky rhythm. So right now I'm just going to leave the other drums aside. I'm just going to do hat first. Pick some kind of cheap sounding hat, and we're going to try and run with this. We're not going to do a straight rhythm like this. That sounds okay, but it's not the vibe we're going for. Instead, what we're going for is something like that. Just give it some wonk. Like that, and kind of try to vary it throughout. And now we can start thinking about adding some kind of a snare or clap, just to start putting things in perspective. So the snares and the claps, they're gonna stay relatively stable. You don't have to move them around too much. Also, you should play with the velocities of the hi-hats to differentiate them. Kind of like that. It's pretty pleasant. I kind of like that. To make stuff sound more lo-fi, you can also try transposing it down. And a lot of low passing, just cutting away a lot of high end for all the instruments. Still want the hi-hat to retain a bit of high end, but not too much. Because we still want it to sound like a hi-hat. Okay, now let's actually try adding a bit of reverb to the keys. What better reverb plugin for Lofi than Valhalla Vintage Verb? It's designed for this purpose. Maybe we can go here, add a little note at the end of the bass. Whoops, velocity's too loud. Whoops. Now it's starting to take a bit of shape. So obviously we'll do all the processing in a second. Let's add a kick. Just find a kind of a lazy sounding kick. Not too snappy, not too strong. And again, we follow the same wonky vibe. And what's cool is that sometimes when we lay the other sounds down in like a very grid-like manner, like on the grid, without moving it around, it tends to sound wonky as well because everything else is wonky. So that's an example of that. But this one we can move. Yeah, so swing. Swing is the key here. Swing is when you move like the second and fourth notes to the right a lot more than the line would suggest. So maybe we can take this kind of more active phrase, bring it over here, then bring over the entire section back. Yeah, something like that. Usually you want to keep the velocities of the kicks and snares consistent, although that's by no means a rule. But generally, if it's a low-end instrument, you want to have the impact there. So it's just literally a matter of moving it around, making mistakes in the timing, and seeing which mistakes are flattering. Okay. So I kind of like what we had here. So we'll just repeat that. It's playing off the groove nicely. Maybe we can move this, kick around or something. That's pretty cool. Okay, let's soft clip our master. I don't want it to be clipping. We don't get that distortion. Okay, now let's try a different bass sound. That's a bit too aggressive. Now, there's 2 more steps that we need to achieve before we can safely call this a lo-fi beat. One is to apply lo-fi processing. So usually it's tape, cassette distortion and stuff like that. So you can use either RC20 or cassette. I'll use RC20 for this particular case because it does everything I need, plus it has better noise than cassette does. It has a bunch of different noise sounds. So you want like a vinyl crackle effect. Turn the flux down to turn the tone up. And I like having some flutter on the magnetic tape effect here. Obviously have the wobble. And notice I'm only doing this on the key, and now my voice is going to sound lo-fi because it's just constant noise. But I'm only putting the effect, the RC20, on the chords. I don't want to really hit the bass with it because it'll take away the low end from the bass. And I want the bass to be solid. If you want to also be lo-fi about it, you can reduce the width. Making it, because there's no hi-fi stereo sound in vintage era, or like in the vintage era that lo-fi music is trying to replicate. You're not going to find that. It's always mono. Some high passing. And now what's the final step, you may ask? Well, this is why we grouped everything here, because we have 2 sounds going here. It's the chords and the bass, and what we're going to do is throw on a compressor and then assign a sideshade input to be the kick. And it's going to be sidechaining the bass and the chords, and we're going to be doing it like so. So sidechain from kick. And you want it to be pretty aggressive, but now we're getting that lo-fi sound for sure. You can be like really stupid with it. And that, I've heard songs like this on the 24-hour lo-fi study streams. I'm sure you have too. So yeah, play with the release settings until you like how the groove is coming with it, because the release is what's going to determine how wavy the sidechain effect is. Usually you want longer settings, because if it's too short, it's just gonna sound distorted and weird. And now that the kick is punching through so hard, you don't need it to be that loud, actually. very quiet actually, and it'll still function. So I'm gonna cut away a bit of high end from the kick, even though it already has none, but there's some that I hear that I can cut away. This is not for mixing purposes, it's just for to give it a more lo-fi sound. So here we can take away this kick. Okay, now we're kind of basically there. And for like another section, you can add like a shaker sound or something. Let's see if there's any shakers. Or like a tambourine or something. And everything has to be wonky and off time. Now you might hear that it's too loud, and that's correct, it is. So I'm gonna bring it back. It's too hi-fi, too hi-fi. We need to reduce the high end. Transpose it. Increase the attack, make it sound kind of like a shaker. Maybe add some notes in here. It's cool to introduce like wonky random notes. Not random, but and you can like stop and start notes randomly as well to like kind of simulate the sound of sampling. Kind of like that. careful that the velocities aren't too loud so the notes don't jut out too much. And it's a lot of fun. You can kind of just, you know, figure out different combinations and harmonies to come up with. So for my shaker, I want to reduce the volume of the second hit. It gives it a wonkier vibe. Okay, and if you're up to it, you can go on your master bus, and once you have all of your dynamics sorted with the limiting or whatever, you can try throwing on another lo-fi plugin, like cassette or something, to really max out the lo-fi vibe. And tape does sound nice, especially if it's a decent tape simulation. You get that kind of distortion, but we don't want too much of it. Reduce the stability for that pitch flutter. That gives it a very elevator sound. And the artifacts will give you all that amplitude modulation. Almost like it was recorded on real instruments and recorded to real tape. There you have it. I hope you guys learned something from this video. I hope you guys can go on and make your own lo-fi tunes. Just don't be too cliche about it. Come up with some new stuff. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed this one. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.